Hi, John. We are
Hey,
all set up live on YouTube. Thank you for
awesome.
speaking with us today.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, you should be able to share your screen shortly.
Is that working?
Yes.
Awesome. Do you do like an intro thing or should I just get into it?
Yeah, you can get started. Yeah.
Awesome. Sounds good. Yeah, thanks so much for having me. My name is Jon Kuperman. I'm a developer advocate at Cloudflare. Um, I work on a lot of different products right now, but like I think primarily I work on Cloudflare workers and Cloudflare pages. And yeah, I'll kind of get into all that. But what I wanted to talk about today was just kind of like starting at a high level of web performance and kind of covering some of the kind of big things that a lot of people do or should be doing, and then kind of drilling down into some like really interesting high-tech optimizations that you can do to make your websites a lot faster. Um, and so the first thing that I like to start about is like taking Cloudflare or any other services like just off the table for a second. Like I kind of like this kind of hypothetical situation where you have a web app and or maybe you start a new job and they have a web app, something like that, and it's really slow. Like it takes forever for the pages to load and users are complaining and having a rough time. So like to think about like what kind of things people often do first, and these are like all great things that you should consider doing. So one thing is that like images in general can be a pretty big problem for slowing down websites. So like one easy win is detecting, when you have an image, let's say you're displaying it like a header image or something like that, and the header image is like 500 pixels wide by 500 pixels tall. But a lot of people won't necessarily resize the image itself. So they'll maybe be serving like 1,000 by 1,000 picture that has to come across the network, and then they'll be resizing it. So like one thing to consider, and tools like Firefox and Chrome DevTools will help you spot this if you run like a Lighthouse audit, is just making sure that you scale down the picture if you're putting it in constraints. Another thing that's really interesting is like there's this concept of lossless image optimization or lossless image compression. So you can think about lossless means that it doesn't affect the quality of the image. And one thing that I didn't know for years is that like if you use a tool like Photoshop or something like that, and you're like messing around with your image, and then you save it as like a PNG or a JPEG, all of these tools like Photoshop will add all this metadata to the image, right? And it'll be like name, number of edits, program used to edit it, all this stuff that can be really helpful if I, make all these edits and I send it to you and then you can see all the edits, but they're really not helpful on the web. So there's a lot of different cool tools you can use. Cloudflare has an offer, which we'll talk about, but there's also like, there's an open source tool called Image Optim, and you can just drag your images in there and it'll just remove all that metadata. So it'll shrink your images without losing any quality. Another thing, which is like a little bit more technical getting into, is like looking at your JavaScript and your CSS. And there's a lot of different things you can do. Like the thing that you should probably always be doing is concatenating and minifying. So like kind of grouping all of your JavaScript files together, minifying them. So, you run like Cursor or something that turns your variable names into single letters for production, stuff like that. And then you can go really deep on that, right? Where like if you have a single page app, like a React app or something like that, you can start configuring your bundler, like configuring Webpack. Maybe you're like splitting bundles out. So you have like one smaller bundle that you serve on the home page and then, some follow-up bundles that load in. So that's like a very technical thing. And I think I could do like a whole talk on that, but that's not what this talk is for. Another really cool thing you can take advantage of is compression. So a lot of hosts these days will support Gzip, which is a compression format that the browsers also support. So for those not familiar, it basically takes all your files, JavaScript, CSS, images, everything, and it'll compress them, and then it'll send the smaller compressed version over the wire. And then you as the user, your browser will get them and it'll like uncompress them and run them. So that can be a really cool way of just like one click speeding things up. So yeah, so those are some things that I like to think about before we get into any like kind of high tech or, any like Cloudflare specific things. Just like be mindful of your images, be mindful of your JavaScript and CSS, take full advantage of whatever your website host offers you as far as like compression or anything like that. Yeah, and that should get you on like a pretty good track. So before we get too far into it, I wanted to like talk a little bit about like how the landscape has changed over the years. So I think that like if you look back like 5 years ago or something like that, or maybe longer, maybe like 10 years ago, we were all kind of doing these dynamic web apps for everything. So you would write your own like Node.js server or like a Ruby on Rails server. And then you'd have like your front end code, like, you know, jQuery and a bunch of libraries. And so deploying these apps was like pretty difficult in a lot of ways, where you would have to like get a VPS or someplace that supported Node or Ruby, and kind of install it and keep it up to date. And you had security issues, right? Like, I don't know if anyone here has run like a WordPress site before, but if you like forget to update your WordPress site for a few weeks, there's like a really good chance that it'll get hacked. So you have to be like very mindful of all this stuff. And it's kind of a headache. So you're like paying a lot of money, difficult to set up, security issues that you're worrying about. You know, there's just a big tax involved with deploying one of these sites. So then like many years ago, I think maybe Jekyll was like the first static site generator that I had heard of. I think it came from the folks at GitHub. And it was this really cool idea where you could still have these templates that were very dynamic. You know, you could like loop through all of your posts and stuff like that, but you would do the build once client side on your laptop and then just send the static HTML files up to a host somewhere. And one of the first hosts that made it really easy was GitHub Pages. So you could like take your Jekyll app, generate a website, put it up on GitHub Pages. And now you didn't have a lot of these concerns. You didn't have to pay any money for like a host, and you didn't have to worry about security because it's just HTML and CSS. And you didn't really have to worry about maintenance either. It would kind of scale, you know, it was on GitHub's network. So that was really cool. But at the same hand, there's like a lot of stuff that, like, I think a static website is like the perfect answer for like a very fast initial page load. But there's a lot of really cool stuff that you can do with some dynamic content. And so I think like one of the big game changers here was when Gatsby Js came out. And so Gatsby came out and it was like, okay, what if we added some JavaScript to the page load, which is like kind of a bummer, right? Like it'll take longer for the page to load, but in return, we can do all this really amazing stuff with the JavaScript. And so they can do very cool things with Gatsby, like they can preload links before you click on them, right? So if you have a blog post with like 10 links on it, Gatsby will take that JavaScript and it'll use like the browser's preload API or prefetch API to cache all of those links. So if a user clicks on them, boom, it just instantly loads. And they can also do really cool things like image optimization stuff. So they can like stream in a blurry version of your image right away, you know, really fast. And then after the page loads, they can turn it into something really, you know, sharp and good contrast. So this is like a really cool kind of like hybrid technique. And by the way, if there's any like questions or anybody wants to interrupt, like I always like the back and forth. So feel free to just like jump in and yell at me.
Sure. Yeah. So far, these the things which you have told are very informative about the different techniques that we can use about compressions and images and videos and all those stuff. So it will be interesting to know more about like how we can combine all those aspects with Cloudflare.
Yes, absolutely. So cool. So yeah, like Gatsby comes out and it sort of is this big game changer where it's like you can do all this like really cool performance stuff, and like kind of the downside is maybe a slower page load. And so what's really interesting is that Cloudflare sits at this abstraction point. You know, like Gatsby would be like, you could almost think about it like an SDK, right? Where you're like, and if you want to use Gatsby, you have to make a new project, install Gatsby, you know, use it. Cloudflare sits very differently, right? Where Cloudflare is like at the DNS level. We don't really care about the technology stack that you're using, but all of the requests for your domain come routing through us. So that like puts us in a really interesting position where we can do some optimizations without you as the developer needing to actually, you know, do anything. You don't have to install an npm package. You don't have to, you know, change a config or anything like that. So to kind of get started, I had made this very contrived application example. So let me go ahead and close this. So it's basically just this pretty static website. I'm trying to find the little guy here. Okay, so it's just some HTML. It says like, hello world, welcome to our super sweet app. I've got like some JavaScript, you know, a main file that relies on jQuery. So we've got jQuery, a little bit of an old style here, and then some CSS to make it look cool. And then if we go back over to the browser, we can kind of see the thing loading. It's just like a cool picture of a mountain that I found, and then the hello world, welcome to our sweet app. So the first thing that I did was I just took this app and I went to Amazon S3 and I just dumped the site directory, right? So like this build directory with the HTML, CSS, JavaScript, images, just very basic stuff. So I dumped it all in S3. And at this point, Amazon offers this like incredible suite, like hundreds of products for your application development. But at this point, it's literally just sitting uncompressed, unoptimized on an S3 bucket. This would be like the same as if you bought a VPS, installed like Linux and Nginx, and just stuck your static assets up there. So it's pretty cool. And so I also have this thing, I think, I'll share this out right afterwards. I meant to make like a PDF of it, but I sort of like every step of the way I've measured everything. So as we talk about the steps that I do, we'll kind of come back here and look. So when I stuck it in the S3 bucket, and let me make this a little bigger, it was 6 total requests, like the images, CSS, all that stuff. The website itself is 2.9 megabytes. It took 8.9 seconds. DOM content loaded. Basically, all I did here was I opened the Chrome DevTools and kind of did a network refresh and then copied all the things. And so this site has a lot of stuff like wrong with it, right? Like, so if you go and you look at the source code here, so let me go and inspect element, go to the network tab and refresh again, and then start looking at like all like the JavaScript and things like that are totally uncompressed, right? So there's like a lot of stuff that we could do. So this isn't meant to like bash on S3 or any other host. This is just showing like all these things that can be done. So the very next thing I did was I took the exact same application, the same source code and everything like that, and I moved it over to Cloudflare Pages. So this is a little bit of a newer offering, so I'm not sure how many folks know about it, but you can go to pages.cloudflare.com. And on its kind of surface, it's our Jamstack platform, right? It looks a lot like Netlify or like Vercel. It's like our place that you can host these apps, and it works very similarly where you sign up for a Cloudflare account for free, you connect your Git or GitHub or GitLab repo, point it at a branch, and then whenever that branch rebuilds, it deploys the website. So on its surface level, it looks really, really similar. But behind the scenes, there's some really cool stuff that happens with it as well. So just moving over to Pages, you get automatically turned on this Cloudflare CDN. So for those, again, I'm not exactly sure where everybody's coming from as far as experience, so I'll try not to dwell too much on intro content, but also try not to skip over it. But the CDN is essentially, Cloudflare has hundreds of data centers all over the world. And when you put a site on Cloudflare, either behind the CDN product or on the Pages product, which uses the CDN product, it takes a copy of your site and puts it in all like 200 plus data centers. And so then when a user goes to use it, it'll grab it from the closest data center. So you'll see big improvements there. So moving it over to Pages gets you that right away. And so between moving it over to Pages and Pages putting it behind the Cloudflare data center, we started to see some really cool stuff. So we still have the same number of requests, but Cloudflare has managed to shave off some of the bytes transferred using their Cloudflare cache. And it finishes in a lot less time. Again, same uncompressed files, they're just a lot closer to me now, as opposed to like a random S3 bucket. It finds the closest data center to me. So just immediately we've been able to see some gains. And again, like I try really hard not to just kind of speak to Cloudflare because there's so many other cool companies that are doing great stuff. So you would see very similar gains if you moved your site onto something like Netlify, or if you took advantage of some of the Amazon's optimization offerings. You know, still got kind of the same thing. You take your site, add a caching layer, add a CDN to it, and already you see big improvements. So the next thing that I wanted to talk about is now like Pages on its first level, like I mentioned, looks like, oh, I get it. It's like another Jamstack offering. But the cool thing about it is that once you are on our like kind of DNS, we call it orange clouded, like that's our logo. It means like your website at a DNS level is now behind Cloudflare. You get full advantage of all of these free and some premium offerings that are just single button clicks. So if I go over here to my Cloudflare account, I have this old URL that I used for our little project here. So if you go to like nodecasts.io, which used to be my cool video thing, now it's just serving the same demo app that we have. But now that I've added it to Pages, when I log into Cloudflare, I actually have this section here. So I click on nodecast.io, and I start getting all of this cool stuff. So you get analytics, which is really cool. I wanted to talk about this from like a micro performance optimization. So probably the most common analytics library is Google Analytics. And the way that works, I'm sure a lot of you have messed with it before, but you make an account and then they give you this little bit of code and you embed that code. And what that code does is it goes and it like fetches a JavaScript file, which then keeps track of your analytics. So that's like one more HTTP request that people have to wait on, and some more JavaScript that's just kind of running on your site in your main thread. So I find these like server-side analytics to be really cool because they don't require a new request, but they're probably a little bit less accurate or harder to do because, you know, they're actually listening in on every single request, whether it's like, you know, bots or spam, things like that. So Cloudflare tries and does a really good job, I think, of actually eliminating that in the analytics. So you get this kind of best of both worlds product where you still can track analytics, but you're not serving an extra JavaScript file. And again, this happens just for free when you sign up for Cloudflare pages. But now that we're here, we get access, like you can see along the sidebar, to like all of this like kind of tool suite, which is really, really cool. And so the first thing that I wanted to do was to go into the speed section here. And I'm going to try really hard to call out everything that's free and everything that's premium, so you kind of understand the differences. So the speed section is pretty fun. Move the Zoom chat. So you basically get this kind of cool thing where it will run like a web page test on your app now that it's on Cloudflare. So I'll go ahead and click test again. I think this takes a while because it'll spin up a VM not on Cloudflare, so it can compare the two sites. So we'll kind of let this run. But if we go into the optimization section, this is where we start getting into some really cool like Cloudflare specific offerings. So the first two that I wanted to talk about are based on images. So Cloudflare has this one product, which is really cool, called Polish. And Polish will optimize images. So basically, remember before I was saying that one thing you could do is you could download Image Optim. And then what you could do is you could, before you deploy your site, you could take all the images that you added, drag them into Image Optim. It'll remove the metadata and then deploy your site. So this is a really cool, again, like Cloudflare being uniquely positioned. You can just now deploy your site with the unoptimized images. And then Cloudflare, if you enable Polish, will go through and it'll optimize all the images on your domain before it sends them out to the CDN. So kind of one less step for you to have to do manually, just something that you can have automatically done. And then another option for those that don't know is like there's this Webp image standard. And it's a lot more efficient than like PNGs or JPEGs or anything like that. So with another click of a button, one click to enable it, one click to enable Webp, and your images should be loading like a lot faster right there. Another thing that's great, it could be a manual step, but minification, like I talked about this earlier, like your CSS, JavaScript, HTML, all that stuff should be minified, concatenated together, turned into single variable names. If you have like a big, robust single page application, or if you're running like a Gatsby site using a CMS, something like that, this is probably already done for you in a build step, like Webpack will go through and do this step. But if you're not, then this is like a really nice way of just like uploading your site just as is, and then turning on this minification and it'll just optimize it for you. And so then if we go back to my little checklist here, I took the same site now that's on Pages, and literally all I did was I went and I clicked these three buttons, like go ahead and optimize JavaScript, CSS, and HTML. And we can see again that we've got like this big further improvement where we've gone down from like 2 seconds to about half a second. The results that you see will vary here based on how much CSS JavaScript you have. Like for example, if you have a very simple personal site, you probably won't see giant gains from it. But if you have a site that a lot of folks are working on, you can see really big gains from this. Awesome. So the next thing kind of still when we're on the images that I wanted to talk about is that we also have this free product called Mirage. It's still in beta right now. But the idea with Mirage is that we've seen this a lot before, like folks on mobile browsers, especially because the screens are so small. Like if you think about a blog and you have 10 blog posts and each one has a featured image, it's like a very common scenario. And maybe when you launch on desktop, you can see like 3 of the blogs, depending on your screen, maybe you can see 4. But you've got this concept of like above the fold, below the fold, right? So you've got these like images that are placed below where the browser can see initially based on the screen size. And so another cool thing that we're kind of uniquely positioned to do is that Mirage will just read the device information from the HTTP request, and it'll figure out how big the screen size is going to be. And then it'll just automatically wrap any images that you have below it in a lazy load function. And again, so you don't have to do this yourself. You don't have to find like a React lazy load library or anything like that. You can just upload your website, whatever stack you use, come here, click this, and then you'll start seeing like the very typical, the site will load with, let's say your mobile browser has one blog post. So boom, it'll load with that one. And when you scroll down in mobile, you'll see that there's like maybe an empty image and then it fills in with that. So another like really easy optimization that you can just get right out of the gate. Again, none of these are guaranteed improvements. Like for example, if you have no images on your site, or if you only have one image on your site, like in my case, I only have this one background image, which will always be above the fold. So Mirage would not give this site any advantage. But if you have a blog or a news site or any kind of thing that is image heavy, Mirage is a really cool thing to check out. Is that making sense so far? So we move to cover pages, which gives you the CDN and the caching for free. And then we go and start shopping for free features. Like we click Minification, we click lossless image compression, and then we click Mirage. And we've got some really cool boosts right there. All right. So the next one that I wanted to talk about, we had mentioned Gzip over at the beginning of the talk, right? We had said that browsers support this compression format called Gzip. And if you Gzip things on the server, then boom, they automatically are smaller and then get decompressed by the browser and rendered. And so a lot of these services like Netlify, Vercel, all of these will either add automatically or give you the option to Gzip all of your content, which is great. So it'll be a lot smaller and you can check the headers like in the network to see if it's being Gzipped. But a few years ago, a new compression standard came out called Brotli. I think if you search for like Brotli compression, yeah, so you can see that it's like this open source like browser backed format that all the major browsers support. And some stats about Brotli, which are really cool, is that Brotli will compress JavaScript files 14% smaller than Gzip does. And any HTML files will get 21% smaller and 17% smaller for CSS files. So you see these big differences. And so another thing that's completely free with the Cloudflare stack is that you can go over here still in speed optimization and just turn on Brotli compression. And so this will upgrade you from Gzip to Brotli. And again, you'll notice big speed improvements, just no changes, no chance of breaking anything, just anything that can be Brotli compressed will be Brotli compressed and your site will get faster. All right, so now we've got three more to get into, but we start to get into the like very kind of like high tech ones that take a little bit of explaining. So how is everybody feeling right now? Things okay with what I've covered so far?
Yes, these are like inbuilt features, right? So as a developer, that to small businesses can easily like avoid these internal steps and just configure them through the buttons. So
absolutely, yeah. And so again, like if you've already kind of solved for a lot of this, like let's say you have a big Gatsby site and it's already doing this on build, some of these will still be huge, like Brotli, there's no way to do that with config, and Mirage would be harder to do. But if you've got like a custom stack, like I always kind of view this as like shopping cart. You get your site on there and then you just go to the speed optimization and you start clicking things that you want and keep refreshing your page, and it really should just get noticeably faster as you go. So yeah, this requires like no engineering. All of this stuff is like backwards compatible, so it won't break anything, and you can just kind of click stuff on and it should go.
Sure.
Awesome. Okay. So now the big three, which are like a lot. And again, please feel free to like jump in and interrupt if I miss something. So we have this program called Rocket Loader. And Rocket Loader is like really interesting, but it has to do with like the fact that JavaScript files are often the thing that block the main thread, that block rendering. And I think like the perfect use case here is like, imagine that you have an HTML heavy site, like a blog or something like that, but you also have ads on it, right? And you're serving these ads so you can make some money. So one of the things that's kind of problematic, just the way the browsers work, is that the browsers will block rendering and interactivity until these big giant ad bundles load. So we've all seen this before, right? Where we go to like some news website or something like that, and we hit a page, and honestly, the content you care about is just some text, right? It's like a header, a news article, maybe an image, but you're like stuck there. You can't scroll, you can't click because these like giant ads are like loading in all over the place. And unfortunately, that's just like a reality. Like, people that write should get paid, and right now, ad funding is the way that that works. So, but the unfortunate experience is that this kind of secondary content is blocking the primary experience, which is scrolling around, clicking on links, viewing images, things like that. So we have this thing called Rocket Loader, and it's pretty cool the way that it works. So basically what it does is when your website gets served, it will take all of your script tags, right? And you can go look in view source, like how many script tags you have, and it'll rewrite them to be script type equals text JavaScript, which is the normal one. It'll rewrite those to be script type equals Rocket Script. And so then the browsers will see all these script tags and be like, I don't know what Rocket Script is. And so then they'll skip over the loading of those scripts. So they'll render the HTML. And while it's rendering the HTML, these like JavaScript files that get pushed out to the edge will be combined, minified, and then served after the fact. So it's kind of this ambitious project to make all JavaScript on your app asynchronous by default. And there's a lot of logic that has to go in, like, well, what is this rendering? How big is it? Where would the size be? So it's not making like a very chunked up experience. So there's like a lot of magic under the hood, but the high level idea is that it'll kick all of your scripts out and make them asynchronous so they load after the fact. And before we get too much further into this, I kind of wanted to cover this idea of like CDNs, or like the edge. Like edge is something that we talk about a lot at Cloudflare. And it's like kind of this, it's a little bit of a tricky concept. Like I always struggle to answer it a little bit because it's like, when you think about, if you go to Amazon S3 and you book an S3 bucket, they make you pick a location for it, right? Like they make you choose like, where is this going to go? And you can pick from like, they have like hundreds of data centers or whatever. So you can be like, oh, it'll go in Oregon, or it'll go in New York or something like that. And that means that that's like where all content is being served from. So if you have a user that lives close, good for them. And if you have a user that lives far away, they'll have to wait for it to go all the way to wherever you chose or not. And so like probably like 5+ years ago, the thing to do would be you would get a lot of buckets. Maybe you would get like start with 2 and put them like equidistant around the world. And maybe you'd get up to 5, 10, 20. And the more you would get, you would need to install and run some sort of load balancing software, right? And what the load balancer would do is it would like look at the request, and then would look at where it's coming from, and it would try to like direct you to the closest server that's not busy right now. And so it would kind of be this like orchestrator where it would be sending your requests around. And this is like really great technology, but it's another thing that was like a big step that would prevent people from being able to just build and ship their own app. Like it's like, oh, I need like a sysadmin. Like I need somebody that can help me install a load balancer and get like sign up for like 10 buckets around the world and like directly, move stuff around. And so I think what we've seen over the years that's really cool is like way less need for like big, robust teams if you just want to build and deploy an app. So like the first thing that was really cool is the concept of serverless. So like AWS coming out with Lambda. And the idea there is that you don't need to really worry about getting VPS, installing Linux, keeping it up to date, all this stuff. You literally just write your code like a function that says, hey, anytime a request comes in, add this header to it and then send the request on. And you just worry about that code and you sign up with your credit card, and Amazon takes care of like deploying it, scaling it up and down. You only pay for what you use. Like there are all these problems that serverless solves, right? And like I remember, like I've been coding for a long time. So like I remember back when I was pretty young, there was this very popular website called Slashdot, which is still around, but it was like the popular website back in the day. And there was this thing called getting slashdotted, where they would link to your article or your website or your company, and they would drive so much traffic to it that it would always take the websites down. And like, I think Hacker News does this a lot of times too, where like somebody will launch a cool startup and then it'll make its way to Hacker News, and then the whole thing will go down for like multiple days because, tens of thousands of people are trying to hit it. So serverless solves like a lot of this problem where you just write your services, deploy them to Cloudflare or Fastly or Amazon, and we take care of all of that scaling, and we take care of all the distribution, stuff like that. So that's great. But then came this like edge concept, right? And so that's like Lambda Edge or Cloudflare workers. So when you write your little function that adds a header or whatever, and you deploy it to Cloudflare, we don't just send it to one data center. We send it to all like 200 plus of our data centers. And so now, like when people hit the website or hit any one of these functions, they're getting it from the absolute closest location that we can have for them. And so this solves like a whole new suite of issues where requests load way faster, single origin servers don't get burdened with all 10,000 of those hits, right? Like if 10,000 people click your website, it probably gets spread very nicely among the 200 data centers. So they solve all these things. So that's like, so we had serverless, then we had serverless at edge. And now with Cloudflare, we can do all these other things at edge too. So when you do Rocket, it will automatically rewrite these tags at the edge server. So it's not like I hit, like I'm in Florida right now. So it's not like I hit Florida and Florida's like, oh, hey, we need to rewrite this page because they use Rocket Loader and it goes back to my origin in like New York. It's like, no, all 200 of these can do it. So when you hit it, the very closest one will kind of rewrite your application to be these tags Rocket script. And then that server will be the one that's responsible for minifying and compressing and then serving the JavaScript later. So I hope that makes sense that like one of the, like doing things at edge makes things fast, right? Because it's close, but it makes it so fast that we can actually start doing things on the edge server that were very impractical to do back in the day. So back in the day, like if all requests had to go through New York, it would be unheard of to do like image processing on the fly or JavaScript optimization on the fly because it's already taking a long time. But now that we have everything running at edge, it opens like all of these doors for like really neat stuff that would be like, you would never have thought about doing before, but now we can do it because it's like probably happening within a few miles of you.
Sure, there is a lot of stuff going with Rocket Loader. Is there any article or engineering blog that people
Absolutely.
can read
Yep.
to
So
understand?
Yep, absolutely. So one of my favorite things about Cloudflare is that we blog like everything that we ever do. And so let's see. Here we go. Can I just send this? I'll send this out afterwards.
Sure,
I'm not sure. Yeah. So we write like very in-depth technical articles on like everything that we do, like how they work, like how they work under the hood, how we measure, everything like that. Yeah, there's a lot going on with these, but the basic idea is that we do this very funny thing of like rewriting your script so that the browser won't render them, waiting for the HTML to load, and then we re-render all the JavaScript. That's what we do there.
Sure.
Awesome. Okay. So the next one, which I think is maybe less confusing, so that's good. So if we go over here to the caching tab, and then we click on tiered cache. So another one, again, I love the question, so please jump in if it gets confusing. But so when you think about like a cache or like a CDN, let's make a really simple example. So you make an app and it's like, I don't know, it does some cool thing, and you deploy it to like New York City. That's like your origin server. And then you sign up for Cloudflare, and it takes a copy of that app. And as people request it, it'll start moving it into all of our 200 data centers. And the way that it does this is that I'm in Florida and I go to use your app, and I go to yourapp.com. And so what Cloudflare at the DNS level will do is it'll route my request to the closest Cloudflare server in Florida. And it'll be like, hey, do you have this app cached? And so say it's the very first time it gets used. So Florida's like, no, I don't have that cached. So then Florida asks New York, and New York gives it to Florida. Florida gives it to me, and now it's in the Florida cache until it gets purged, right? So now if somebody else comes from Florida or somewhere nearby, they'll get a cached version. And so we always call these in the business, we call them like hits and misses, like cache hits, cache misses. So if you redeploy a new site or if you purge your cache, you guarantee that everybody's going to get a cache miss the first time, right? Because it's now empty. It's not anywhere except the origin server. This is actually really funny because I wrote this talk, and then after I wrote this talk, Facebook had that massive outage, right? And so this is a really cool example because one of the things that makes these outages so painful for these big companies is that, none of these companies pay for enough servers and bandwidth to handle 100% cache misses, right? They all rely on stuff being cached because otherwise it would just be astronomically expensive. And so like when Facebook redeploys, like they deploy their web app, or when Twitter deploys its web app, they won't just like, boom, send it to all of their servers. They'll do this like slow rollout. So they'll roll it out to a data center, it'll start doing cache misses, and then it'll warm the cache, It has to be done very slowly. Otherwise, it would just take everything down. And so one of the things that really stinks for these companies when they go fully down is it becomes a really difficult game to get back up again, right? So let's say you have like 100 servers and they all go down, but now you turn all 100 back on, except you always have enough traffic that would really merit like 300 servers, but you just don't pay for that because it's too much money. So if you turn all your servers back on and then everybody hits facebook.com again, it just goes down again. There's like this constant problem where the poor origin servers, which usually have like one or two of, just get so bombarded with traffic that they can't turn back on. So it becomes this like very, very complex problem of like finding ways to like, okay, let's turn Facebook on, but for like US only. And now let's turn it on for like US and Japan. And like they have to like slowly turn things back on. Otherwise it'll just keep crashing. So this is like a real problem at any scale. Like even if you have like you say this one S3 site and that can handle, let's say like 10,000 hits a minute or something like that, I'm making that number up. And you get like 20,000 hits a minute, but it's no problem because you use Cloudflare CDN. So it just is always in the cache and it's not getting bombarded. But then you go into Cloudflare's dashboard and you click purge all cache, right? And now the CDN has nothing. You will go down, right? Your S3 site will absolutely go down because now 20,000 hits come in and it goes down. So we have this really cool thing called a tiered cache. And the tiered cache, this is also pretty new. What it does is out of our like 200 plus CDN locations, we've taken like 50 of them and we've assigned those to be like top level cache sites. And so now let's say I go into my site and I purge all cache. And then here I am coming from Florida and I go to the Florida server and I'm like, hey, do you have this app? And it's like, no, I don't have it. But now the Florida server isn't allowed to bombard the origin server anymore. It can't just do that because it's not a top level site. So the Florida server has to find the closest top level server now. And let's say that's in like North Carolina or something like that. So I'm like, hey, Florida, do you have this app? And it's like, no, I don't have it. But then Florida has to ask North Carolina, hey, do you have this app? And it's like, no, I don't have it, but I have permission to go get it from origin. So the downside to this is when the cache misses, there's like an extra hop, right? Where me to Florida to North Carolina to New York, as opposed to me to Florida to New York. The upside to it is that like we found like 7 or 8 times out of 10, the North Carolina one will already have it. So even if Florida has missed, nobody has to go bother New York because North Carolina has a copy. North Carolina gives it to Florida. And the other thing is that we can really rate limit bombarding the origin server when a cache gets purged. So this solves like a bunch of really cool things. Like if you have a dynamic app and it goes down, or if you need to purge cache, like it solves this whole suite of problems of cache purges taking your website down again. So does that make sense? So the tiered cache takes like some percentage of our total servers, marks them as like, blessed with the permission to actually get from origin. And then if anyone else has a cache miss, they have to ask their closest, top tier service, and it prevents your site from going down again. How'd I do on that one? That makes sense as something that would be helpful?
Yeah, absolutely.
Awesome. Okay, cool. And then the last one that I wanted, so again, this is like just something that you can just toggle on for your website. Boom, it just starts doing it. You get this cool dashboard that shows your miss and hit ratio. Very, very easy. You don't have to like configure anything else. You just turn it on. And I had a really good question from an internal person when I was demoing this talk, which is like, why isn't this on by default? It just seems like a win. And I think it just has to do with the way that we release software. So we'll do a beta, and then we'll go general availability with it. But until we're like 100% sure that it's a great solution, we won't force anybody to use it. So right now it's sitting in this, like it's no longer beta, it's ready for general availability, but it's not a default yet. So you would have to go in and enable it if you wanted to use it. But I'm hoping sometime soon when we work out all the kinks, it'll just be on by default. All right, the last one. This one's really cool because it kind of, I think, shows some of the ambitious behavior at Cloudflare. So this is called Argo Smart Routing. So like when you think about the internet, like if you go in your terminal and you do like ping google.com, you can like watch every DNS hop that it takes to get to google.com, right? And so the internet's this like kind of fantastic thing where you can like, it finds the fastest way based on the fewest number of hops to get from my computer to a google.com server, which is awesome. But there's some problems sometimes. Like one of those hops could go down, like some data center could go down, or one of those hops could just get bombarded. Like maybe there's like a DDoS attack, or maybe they're just having network issues or something like that. And so you can have these problems, and these happen a lot, where like Google.com is totally up and operational. They didn't do anything wrong. But one of the very common network hops along the way from people to Google is down or suffering congestion. And all of a sudden the site is loading really slow or not loading at all. And so one of the really cool things we can do, because we have so much traffic on Cloudflare, like I think if you go to the like Argo Smart Routing page, yeah, so we route 10 trillion requests per month right now. And I think this is even a little bit outdated. But one thing that's really cool about that is we can do network analysis as a private company, and we can try to come up with like really creative solutions to things. So what Argo Smart Routing does is it just monitors all of these common hops. There's like millions of them, right? And it'll detect outages or congestion. And when it detects outages or congestion, it'll reroute you in a different way around it. So I think we have, let me see, pretty sure we have like a cool, I thought we had a cool, oh, here it is. So you can look at, this is probably way too small. You can look at this. So this is like user one, and the green line is Argo Smart Routing, and the orange and gray line is the internet, the way it would be. So if you typed in like ping origin server, you can see that the internet will route it through the fewest number of hops possible, which is what you would want almost all the time. But let's say a hop over here in California went down or was having a bad connection. We can monitor that and we can find a route that is one more hop, but a lot faster for people. And so again, this is one of those like kind of instant wins where you just click enable it, you don't have to think about it. And the Cloudflare network will be monitoring all outages and all congestion, and it'll reroute all of your users to the fastest, not the fewest network hops.
So this is not a technical question, but any reason behind naming these as Argo? Like I remember the movie whenever I see the term Argo, right? So
I actually have no idea. That's such a good question. It's funny too, because we have another product which is totally unrelated called Argo Tunnel. And for those that don't know, Argo Tunnel is like, it's kind of like Ngrok or something like that. So basically you can like take your local host app and you run Argo Tunnel, and it'll generate a secure URL that you can share with your friends or your team that lets them view your local host app. So it's totally unrelated to this, but I don't know what that's a really good question. I'm going to look it up and I'll message you, because I have no idea why this suite of tools is called Argo. But yes, I do think of the movie too. Awesome. Okay. Well, yeah, that is like at the high level, like kind of what I had for you. So to sum up is like, there's all these things that you should be doing that are really cool, and some free tools to do them, like images, compression, Gzip, minification, all that. If you don't have an easy build step or a way of doing it, Cloudflare with the one-click button is a really good solution to take over all of that stuff for you. And almost everything is just free. So you just move your account behind the Cloudflare DNS and you can keep it hosted wherever it's hosted. And then you just start clicking like, hey, minify everything, compress my images, use Brotli, all that stuff is free. And then we also have some like really cool stuff in the works that I feel like people just don't know about, like the tiered caching system, like Rocket for your JavaScript rewrites, and like the Argo Smart Routing to kind of do this congestion avoidance stuff. And so these are really cool things too, which like this one you won't notice until you totally do notice, right? Like everything will just be normal, and then one day something near your data center will go down, and everybody else that uses that data center will be down, but you'll be up because we'll be sending traffic some like very creative way around to get to you. So yeah, with the rest of the time, I'd love like any questions or comments or just chit chat about stuff. I really like talking about all this kind of internet optimization stuff. So yeah, very happy to.
Sure. If someone has some questions after watching this talk, what would be the best way for them to reach out to you?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I'm very, very active on Twitter. So let me actually share my screen one more time. I'm JKUP on Twitter. I think one of the perks of working at Twitter back in the day was getting to claim a nice short name. And my direct messages are always open on here. So yeah, I'm JKUP. Yeah, feel free to just DM me or tweet publicly at me. Anything like that would be a great way to contact me. And if it turns into something where we need to bring on some other folks, then we can move it to email, and we can do like Cloudflare is like they're always excited to reach out to users and chit chat and kind of hang out. So yeah, Twitter would be a good first place to go.
Sure. Thanks, Jon. Thanks for going over all the performance concepts and showing us like how we can do it with Cloudflare pages. Having all these within inbuilt is a good option always. Like most of the platforms will not provide these default options free. Some might be under premium mode,
Yeah,
right? But getting image optimizations and the cache and all those stuff is basically a good one to improve performance for applications which are like blogs uh, or high traffic applications. Yeah.
absolutely. Yeah.
Cool. Thanks again. Feel free to
Yeah.
reach out to John on Twitter, as he told. He is very active over there, and feel free to reach out to him if there are any follow-up questions from this talk.
Yeah.
Thank
Thanks
you
so
all.
much for having me. I really appreciate it.